But with the final presidential debate just barely in the rearview mirror now, people in Green Country and across the nation looking ahead now to the actual election. Now less than 2 weeks away. Here to help us look ahead, Oklahoma State political science professor Dr. Matt Mata. Thanks for joining us this morning, Dr. Mata. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Well, we're going to start this morning with a look at last night's, what everyone's talking about. Perhaps the biggest topic of the night was the pandemic. President Donald Trump taking aim at China, of course, and his Democratic challenger, Joe Biden, taking aim at the president. So do you think voters are taking notes on this pandemic conversation, or has the focus really shifted to economic revival in the United States?
There's absolutely no doubt that the coronavirus pandemic is the issue that is most on Americans' minds in this election. And according to public opinion polls, among people who selected that issue as being the most important, they tend to view Joe Biden as a better leader on that issue than Donald Trump. Did last night's debate potentially make up some of that ground for the president? And that's a question we're going to know the answer to in the coming days as we get more public opinion polling. But initial public opinion polling following the debate suggests that the president made some inroads. He eroded Joe Biden's lead a bit on that issue. So a little bit of ground was made up.
And you know, those candidates, of course, stumping battleground states. The president in Florida today. What do you make of the fight for votes in those swing states with all of this going on?
Yeah, so, thinking about last night's debate in particular, Donald Trump may have changed the way that some people feel about him and his presidency and his performance on the issues, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to change how people vote. We're seeing again in the initial polls that were taken after the debate, most people feel the same way about how they plan to vote as they did before the debate. That's partly because only the most interested tend to tune in to these debate events. And we also have to keep in mind that as of this morning, 50 million Americans have already cast their ballots. So while there is certainly time for rallies, and while there's certainly time for debates to help President Trump erode some of Joe Biden's lead in the polls, a lot of voting is already happening, and it may to some degree be too little too late.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to my next question. Of course, we're talking about early voting. That's the big topic. 320,000 absentee ballots sent out across Oklahoma this year, more than double really than we've seen here in Oklahoma. So do you think, like you mentioned, is the presidency already decided how much more can we trust those current polls?
Well, so while we've got 50 million ballots already being turned in across the country, turnout is projected to break 2016's records by potentially as much as 20 million votes. So there is still plenty of time for things to change. The polls have yet to change very much since late summer. So as of yet, if everything held true as it is today, you would expect Joe Biden to win this race. But there are still over 100 million votes potentially yet to be counted. So the possibility for change still exists, to be sure.
And another big question, do you think that these candidates will accept the outcome of this unprecedented election?
Well, I think certainly from a Democratic perspective, we would hope that both candidates would accept the results of the election. It's so hard for me to know, both because we don't necessarily know what's going to happen on election day, or what the candidates are thinking, whether or not they plan to accept. But from a normative, democratic, little d democratic perspective, we would certainly hope so.
All right, Dr. Mata, good to see you. Thanks so much for weighing in for us always. We certainly appreciate you.
Thanks again for having me.